An HSA documentary.
Alcatraz.
A maximum security prison. By Lucy Brown,
Lucy Marino, Ava Hatcher, and Emma Humbrecht.
As an elite security facility, Alcatraz Island was known for being a very last resort for criminals who were convicted of several crimes. It was first constructed as a military base in the early 1850s, but following the Civil War, it shifted to becoming a prison. In 1934, the Alcatraz jail was officially built in San Francisco Bay, California. The prison was located 1.5 miles offshore on 22.5 acres of land.
Alcatraz Island was established in the 1850s and played an important, although forgotten, history during the Civil War. The Rock is often remembered as being one of the most notoriously infamous prisons in U.S. history, but it plays an important role in shaping the United States prison system for generations to come.
With cliffs that rose to 50 feet high and deep black ocean surrounding it, as well as extremely large frigid waves, making the escapes challenging, this location was remote and fatal. The land had incredibly strict security that defended the world and later influenced U.S. jails to come.
Life at Alcatraz prison was difficult for prisoners, but they had access to food, clothing, medical attention, and shelter. Every other privilege had to be earned through hard work. They could earn recreation like painting, library access, and music. They could also earn visits from families. Prisoners did still have some rights, and the warden, knowing that bad food could cause riots, gave the inmates buffets of good food, and they could come up for seconds and thirds if they wanted. Alcatraz was also the only prison to give the inmates warm showers. They did this hoping it would discourage them from trying to escape and swimming in the cold waters to the bay. And they still had a little fun. Al Capone was allowed to play a banjo in the prison band, and on Sunday nights they performed. During their time there, the band played over 500 songs.
Cells in Alcatraz contained of a cot, a running sink, and a toilet. They were around 9 feet by 5 feet large, and in total there were 336 in the prison. Alcatraz Island has some strict rules. Perhaps the most severe was the silence rule, introduced in the 1930s. Except for mealtime and recreation, inmates were forbidden to speak to each other. Failure to follow this rule could result in punishment. But after a few years, it was taken away due to how cruel it was. Although it protected the world, the conditions were terrible, with cramped, unpleasant quarters, isolation, and harsh penalties. This information demonstrates how awful life was in Alcatraz, which makes us wonder why, despite its ability to keep criminals out of the world, people were forced to suffer in such terrible conditions.
After Alcatraz was built, Native Americans occupied the island in 1969 to 1971. The occupation of Alcatraz was a 19-month-long occupation by 89 Native Americans that raised awareness of how the government was unfair, since they wanted to own it. The government changed its decision to end the Indian self-determination and more stateless. When Alcatraz closed down, the USA declared it government territory. The Native Americans called Sinkangu Lakota called it Native American land in March of 1964. The occupation lasted for only 4 hours. This was important since it led to celebrate indigenous peoples.
The Civil War demonstrated a direct influence on Alcatraz Island, protecting San Francisco from the war. It was home to a large assortment of weapons, including guns and cannons. During the Civil War, the Alcatraz fort took on a new role. When violence on the East Coast descended into chaos on April 1861, Alcatraz shielded the Union State of California from an anticipated Confederate takeover. Alcatraz Island was first utilized by the U.S. military in 1853 when the U.S. Army built a fortress on the island, turning it into Fortress Alcatraz. Alcatraz Island was originally named Isla de los Alcatraces, meaning Isle of the Pelicans. In 1859, this heavily guarded fortress was completed.
Alcatraz Island's defenses were used as a Union stronghold to repel the Confederates throughout the American Civil War. Additionally, Confederate prisoners of war were housed at Alcatraz during this period, marking the facility's first usage as a prison. Throughout the late 19th century, this military prison kept growing and held a variety of inmates.
Alcatraz was incredibly hard to escape from. Some of the things that prevented inmates from escaping were cleverly placed guard towers and wardens that worked full time to prevent any riots. Still, there were some notorious escape attempts. One of the most famous escapes from Alcatraz was the spoon escape. On June 12, 1962, the Ingman brothers, John and Clarice, along with their fellow escape partner, Frank Morris, a notorious drug and weapons seller, had a very risky plan. They took their wooden spoons, and over time, it was thought to take almost 2 months, they started to dig out of their air vent's weak spot. And by June, they were ready. They escaped out of thin air vents and traveled on a raft in the oceans. This raft was constructed from a number of thick rubber prison raincoats. The three men were prepared after spending 6 long months in the hidden room. They went back and forth from their cells to the hidden room without being seen by guards to work on the raft.
These three men, preparing their escape, built dummy heads made out of paper mache, flesh-colored paint, and actual human hair. They placed them on their pillows the night of the escape and put their blankets over them, hoping the guards wouldn't notice that it actually wasn't them.
Escaping through San Francisco Bay's frigid waves. No one has any idea where they went, whether they survived, or even where their bodies are. They were never to be seen or heard from again.
All of them were listed as most likely dead due to the impenetrable cold of the water. BBC calls the escape the most clever escape of all time. One of the things that made Alcatraz almost impossible to live in was the fact that every week, almost 1 million gallons of water had to be brought to the island, due to there being no fresh water supply because they were surrounded by the murky Pacific Ocean.
Besides from these three escapees, there were many other dangerous inmates at Alcatraz.
Perhaps the most famous was Al Capone.
American mobster Al Capone gained notoriety for committing numerous crimes, which included bribery, murder, prostitution, gambling, narcotic trafficking, bootlegging, and murder. But he was put in jail for tax evasion because they couldn't prove that he was guilty of any of those.
The topic of Alcatraz prison is very important and has gone from being a Civil War fortress to holding dangerous prisoners inside the jail. This federal prison was greatly important to the outside world, providing them with safety from the gangsters inside of it. The conditions were rough, but prisoners still had rights.
The historical importance Alcatraz prison shows is that it had a many-layered history, which involved being a Civil War fortress, military base, site in a civil protest occupation, and a prison, which it is known to as this day. Because of Alcatraz's rich history, the place draws in over 1.4 million people to this infamous prison.
The Rock, the prison's nickname from the tall cliff it stood on, had an important impact on how the country's prison systems were developed for future generations.
During the Civil War, Alcatraz became the largest American fort west of Mississippi River. The Army sent convict soldiers in the 1860s, but after the Civil War, Alcatraz focused more on becoming a prison.
Alcatraz relates to Chicago, all from the famous Al Capone, also known as Scarface. Because of Alcatraz, the prison system is more secure, safer for people who work there, less strict, but still has a punch to keep prisoners in line, and become a better place to put the ones who have tried to escape safely. Thanks to Alcatraz, prisons are in order and have a better reputation than giving beatings to the ones who misbehave. Alcatraz Island is now a museum where tourists can come and discover what it used to be.
Alcatraz closed in March of 1963 due to how expensive the prison was. After 29 years of operation, they decided the institution had to close. Running the prison cost $10.1 a person, which is 3 times more than any other federal prison. Due to its location, the saltwater waves could crash against buildings, causing constant repairs to be needed.
It is now home to lush gardens, and many people from around the world come to visit this impactful place. In conclusion, Alcatraz was a place where criminals who have done the worst have gone. keeping the rest of the world safe using its harsh rule, high expectations, and heavily guarded borders.